right, I have 2 o'clock Central, which means it must be 3 o'clock Eastern. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you all to the fourth Agricultural Education for All Learning session. This is a summer series of learning that's hosted by NAA and National FFA. This is part of our commitment to making our organizations welcoming and safe places for all individuals as their authentic selves. I'm Ellen Thompson, and I work on behalf of the National Association of Agricultural Educators as the project director for the National Teach Ag campaign. Today's session, just a couple of items, and then I'll turn it over to our wonderful presenter, Jamie. But today's session will last anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour in terms of structured time. And then we have been allowing, and if the presenter's time allows as well, time afterwards for any kind of informal question and answer or discussion that may be needed. This session is being recorded. You can find this session and all the previous sessions and all the registering for all the coming sessions on the NAA professional development page. And so wherever you went today to register, that's where you'll be able to find the recording for this. Give us about a day or two, and then we get those put up, as well as any of the notes from the presenter. This session does allow for you to gain professional development credit, so we will email those out to you to the email address that you use to register with. Questions are absolutely encouraged through the chat function, or make sure that you unmute yourself and ask verbally if you'd like to. I'm sure Jamie would welcome and encourage your questions. We hope that you're here today to grow and learn as an educator and as a human. These sessions are all about sharing and being open to exploring ideas and concepts so that we may all be more empathetic, aware, inclusive, and accepting. Judgment-free zone where respectful dialogue is absolutely and positively encouraged. So what I'd like to do now is introduce our topic for today, which is, as you can see on the screen, implicit bias. For the classroom. And this particular session is really all about understanding stereotyping and prejudice that guides our preference for certain social groups. This is often an automatic response, something that we don't even know and has been trained into us in one way or another through our nature or nurture environment. So it's going to introduce us to some case studies, and it will also challenge us to explore our own unconscious biases and see how we can use that information to be better educators and to be better humans. Our presenter today is Jamie Nebbett. Jamie is currently the academic advisor for online students within the Kentucky Community and Technical College system. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Communication and a Master's in Arts in Adult Education from Western Kentucky. She has been involved in cultural competency, inclusion, diversity, and equity trainings and annual plans, and has helped with the implementation of a campus-wide diversity awards program. So with that, Jamie, I will turn it over to you, and my colleagues and I at NAA will monitor the chat, and I'll interject if there is anything that comes up. Otherwise, it's all you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, sound great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for joining us today. We're just going to talk a few minutes about implicit bias in the classroom. I promise you this is nothing you haven't heard before, but maybe a different spin on things. Like Ellen said, I'm a diversity practitioner, and I've done cultural competency. I've done implicit bias, unconscious bias, cultural humility, and all kinds of things for higher ed for the past 20 plus years. As you can see. And so I'm currently a doctoral student in the Educational Leadership Program at NKU. And so I start that in the fall. Actually, I start that next week, so I'm excited about that. And I have been with higher ed my entire career. This is all that I know. So I'm a trainer and consultant. So today, we're gonna talk about what is implicit bias. We're gonna talk about how do we manage our biases and what are the implications for organizations when it comes to bias. So I have a definition of implicit bias. I wanted to know if maybe in the chat, you could maybe put what you think, when you hear the implicit bias, what do you think? If you could share some of that in the chat for just a few minutes. I have a definition, but I just wanted to see what your definitions were. And if someone could share some of the chat responses. Stop it. Wait. I want to talk about the significance of this photo. As you can see on the bottom, there's two different looks. So on the top part, you see the iceberg, but on the bottom, you see so much more of the iceberg. And I think that resembles what we see every day. We see people, we see their faces, but we don't know what's inside. And so we need to take the time to be able to remove our biases to get to know them on the inside. So is there any definitions in the chat that we can share?
Samantha Miller says making judgments without realizing it about a person because of one or more of their identities. There's some assumptions about people, unconscious prejudice, unconscious judgment.
Perfect. Okay, so this is the definition that I enjoy. And as you said, it refers to the attitudes and stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Biases can be favorable and unfavorable and are activated involuntarily without our awareness or intentional control. So let's talk a little bit more about implicit biases and social cognition. And these are terms that I'm sure you've heard before. So it operates at the subconscious level. We are not aware that we have them most of the time. Implicit biases are pervasive, so everyone possesses them, even people with avowed commitments to impartiality, such as judges. Implicit biases, they reside deep in our subconscious and are not accessible through introspection. They develop over the course of a lifetime, beginning at a very early age through exposure to direct and indirect messages. They're not mutually exclusive, and they may even reinforce explicit biases. And the implicit associations we hold do not necessarily align with our declared beliefs or even reflect stances we would explicitly endorse. So we have these biases that may not necessarily match what we believe or what we endorse, but we all have these biases. We generally tend to hold these biases that favor our own in-group, even though research has shown that we can still hold implicit biases against our in-group. They're malleable. Our brains are incredibly complex, and the implicit associations that we have formed can be gradually unlearned through a variety of debiasing techniques, such as attending workshops like today, doing additional research and reading on your own of different groups that you're not sure of. Those are some of the ways that you can unlearn these biases that we have. So why should we care about implicit bias? And here's a little graphic that talks about it. So it starts with the negative symbolic attitudes, and then it rolls into implicit racial bias, and then down to prejudice and racial stereotyping, discrimination, up to racial inequality and justice, and then back up to negative symbolic attitudes. So it really is a wheel of feelings that we have and that you experience. And I got this from some of these things that I'm sharing, I got from the Curran Institute. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they have some really good information. And so this is the model that they gave, that I chose. And it suggests that implicit bias is one of the two principal forces that energize widespread racial and ethnic inequality in our society. The other is structural radicalization. So understanding the causes of implicit bias and pushing back against its consequences are critical to the movement for social justice and racial equality. So just for a moment, I'd like to know from anyone again in the chat, what are your feelings about biases and implicit bias as you've gone through your career and things that you've experienced? Do you want to share any feelings about, do you really think that it could be unlearned? If you want to share. That's good. So I see someone that said it's been really difficult to unlearn my biases. That is true. A lot of slow thinking, okay. Okay, good. First step is recognizing, good, that's good. I agree, you have to recognize that you have them. You can't walk through assuming that you don't have any bias. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through the presentation. And someone even said they've already learned to, oh, you guys are so quick. Recognize biases in media. Good, yep. Learn behavior, difficult to recognize. And once you recognize them, then we can work to undo them. Good, thank you for sharing those. All right, so we're gonna talk a little bit now about explicit bias. And this refers to the attitudes and beliefs we have about a person or a group on an unconscious level. Much of the time, these biases and their expression arise as the direct result of a perceived threat. So now we're going to talk a little bit about microaggressions. Again, and these are all terms I'm sure that you've heard at some point. So they are the brief and everyday slights, insults, and messages sent to people of color by well-intentioned white people who are unaware of the hidden messages being communicated. They're messages that may be sent verbally. For example, you speak good English, or non-verbally clutching one's purse more tightly, or environmentally, symbols like the Confederate flag or using American Indian mascots. And we're seeing a lot of that now in the media, where people are removing Confederate flags and things that are offensive to others. So that's really prevalent right now. Such communications are usually outside the level of consciousness, awareness of perpetrators. So sometimes they don't mean they don't mean for these things to happen. Sometimes they just happen. I always like to think about when I was in high school, I had the opportunity, I went to a school that was predominantly white, and there were only about 3 or 4% African-Americans. And I had a white friend in my English class. We were friends. We had friends all year long. And when it came to awarding night, I received a scholarship to one of the local universities. And this person who was my friend actually said, well, you only got that because you're Black. And I was so hurt and so offended because we were friends. But that was definitely a microaggression at the time. And we're going to talk about, you have a moment to share some of those, any microaggressions that you've seen or committed or witnessed as we go forward. So I always like to share. So I know what it feels like, and I try to make a conscious effort to not do the same thing. And that came from this definition I used from Dr. Durrell Wing Sue. And microaggressions are real. We need to be aware of that. And so there are 3 types of microaggressions. The first one is the micro assault, and it's a conscious and unintentional slurs, actions, such as using a derogatory term to refer to a person of color. Again, if you have examples, save them for your breakout. We have micro insult, and this is verbal and nonverbal communication or snubs that are rude, insensitive, and demean a person's identity, implying that a woman or person of color receives something due to affirmative action, like I shared with my story. And then we also have micro invalidations. And these are communications that exclude, diminish, negate, or nullify the feelings, experiences, thoughts, and realities of a marginalized group of people, telling a person of color that they are being oversensitive to a racist comment that was made. When I think of micro invalidation, I also like to think about, sometimes you hear people say, I don't see color. You could be talking to someone, they could say, well, I don't see color. And that's a micro invalidation because you clearly do see my color. You see that I'm a different color than you. You see the color of my skin. So that is a micro invalidation. So now we're going to share a video on workplace microaggressions. If you've seen this video before, again, hold your comments until the breakout. If you can kind of give me a thumbs up, let me know you've watched it so we can move to your breakout rooms so we can share for just a few minutes. Okay, I think everyone has had a chance to watch it. So Sarah's gonna put you in breakouts for just a few minutes, for just about 5 minutes. And these are the things I want you to talk about in your breakout session. And then we'll come back together and discuss those as a group. So I encourage you to please share examples of microaggressions that you have either committed, experienced, or witnessed. And then also answer, how do or will our own biases shape our classroom experience? You can share one you've committed, or you can share one you've experienced. If you don't want to say that you've committed one, that's okay too, or one that you witnessed. So we're just gonna take.
Can you tell me those again, Jamie? And I'm gonna type them in the chat so everybody has them.
Oh, sure. share a microaggression that you have either committed, experienced, or witnessed is the first question. And then the second question is, how do or will our own biases shape our classroom experience?
And do you want them to be ready to share when they get back? Do you want someone
Yes.
to like?
Yes, please. We'll just do maybe 3 or 4 groups just to kind of share the conversation. Perfect. Everyone's starting to come back. I hope you had that 5 minutes went by really fast. I hope you had good conversation. I'm going to share something that someone in my group talked about just as an overall close up. But if anyone would like to share from their group, just 1 or 2 people, just a few couple of things, that'd be great. Any volunteers?
I can share from our group 6. We talked a lot about how there's several offhanded comments like, oh, you look like you belong from whatever school, when there's like very different backgrounds coming into one school district, or I didn't know there were gay men that taught ag, things like that. A lot of those side comments are probably implicit bias. And we talked about how in the classroom we can set lower expectations for kids sometimes because of that. And so we need to watch, are we keeping everyone at the same level of expectations?
Good, that's good, good. Thank you. Anybody else?
I'll share for our group real quickly. We talked about a couple of different things. We talked about young female teachers who are going to work and getting comments from their colleagues indicating that they don't know what it's like to have to get young children scurrying around, trying to get young children together before school. And in fact, the person that this was being said to had young children themselves. And then there was another comment shared about, working with students in agriculture programs and them getting money for food for their animals. And so, some connotations there. And then I also I mentioned that in my experience, I worked at a middle school and heard, some comments about, our African-American male students who were on the football team, and that they were very fast runners and things of that nature that, so just kind of be conscious about things like that. And because most of the times we don't think about things like that.
Right. Thank you, Daniel and Jessica, for sharing. I will say, when I've done this presentation a couple of times, and each time I do this particular activity, it's called a gallery walk. And it's amazing to feel the mood change when we get to this point where people have to, and it's an activity that you're welcome to use. I put Post-its on the walls, and I put committed, witnessed, and experienced. And people can freely put as many Post-its as they want on the wall. And it is amazing to watch the emotions of the room change as people really start to stop and think about what they've committed and what they've seen and what they've allowed to go on when it comes to microaggressions. So I encourage you to use this activity with your classroom and with your staff, just to kind of get the conversation going about the things that we just do every day that we don't even think about. One of the ones I shared in my group, my own microaggression. I didn't say it out loud, but I thought about it, and I was at a store and there was a biracial child, and this child was with 2 white women. And I thought to myself, well, I dare that African-American mom or dad leave that child with the white women. And it was my own bias, my own feeling. And I felt horrible for feeling it, but that's my reality. So I'm still, even though I do this and train people, I still struggle with that on a regular basis. And I'll share, Patrice actually said that it could be changed, but it's intentional practices and it's a slow change. And I thought that was a great way to sum up too, that your biases can be changed, but you have to be very intentional about that process. Anyone else want to share before I move forward? I'm glad you had good conversations.
I had one that I didn't share in our group.
Sure.
I thought about my son. My son, when he was a teenager, and I live in a pretty white community, and we're the only people of color on our street. And my son, he's a teenager, he's walking down the street, and on the other end of the street where we don't really know a lot of the people, he came home and he said, "Mom, as I was walking past the neighbors, she clutched her children."
Mm-hmm.
As if she thought he was going to cause some danger to her children. She didn't know him. He hadn't said anything to them. He just walked by on his own street.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think I do the same thing. You know, if you're in a car and you see somebody come in, you immediately lock the doors. And it's not just racial, it's just anybody. And I think that could be microaggression also. So thank you for sharing. Again, I hope you enjoyed that activity. You feel free to use it for your professional development. It's open to everyone. So we'll continue on. Great conversation. So let's talk a little bit about mental models. And these are models that are established by past events, experiences, and other messages that we receive. They serve as filters through which we observe, interpret, and respond to the world. They shape what we see and hear, what we feel, and even what we do. And they also give birth to stereotypes. So I have a mental model exercise for us. So I'm going to give you some words, and you're going to study them for 10 seconds, but don't write them down just yet.
Hey, Jamie, can you reshare your PowerPoint screen?
Oh, sure. Let me go back. Give me 1 second. Sorry, Sarah.
Oh, not a problem.
Share. Here we go. Okay. So let me go back to this one. Okay. Is everyone seeing this? Okay. Skip ahead.
Looks great.
Okay. Mental models. While I'm getting there, when you think of a mental model, you want to share in the chat what that means to you? Anyone? Where did it go? Sorry. Okay, there we go. So mental models, does anyone have any idea or definition of what that means? I've shared mine, but had you heard of this before? Is this familiar? Can't see the chat. Okay, so here's the exercise. So study the above words for 10 seconds. Don't write them down, but just study them for 10 seconds. So here we go. Okay, so now I want you to take 30 seconds to write down all the words you can remember. If you've done this exercise before, I apologize, but I like it. So we're gonna bear with me for just a second. I see some writing going on. Awesome. Give you a few more seconds. Okay, let's stop. All right, so who wrote the word sleep? Did anybody? Okay, good. I see some hands. Okay. So why did you write the word sleep? Someone want to share really quick? Anybody?
In my mind, like all those words tied to it. So like it
Right.
was the central word to me.
Right. So would you be surprised if you told you that it's not in the list? Because of the mental model, right? We just talked about mental model, but the words, let me go back and show you the list. So here's the list. All those things make you think of sleep. And it's interesting, I actually did this exercise with both of my children, and my 11-year-old did not put sleep, but my 19-year-old did. So it's interesting, the different dynamics and the way that we think about things, but it's because of the mental model. We see these words automatically, we're thinking sleep, but it's not even in there. And that can apply to our classrooms too, right? If you see someone, and for instance, like we talked about the microaggressions of, African-American boys, we know are more likely to be in trouble for behavioral issues, but that may not be the case. But mentally, we're already going to our classroom thinking that, because that's what we've been told, that's what we've been passed on over and over and over again. And that's probably not the issue. So I just like to share that. Again, you can share that exercise. Feel free to use it if you want to. I really like that because it talks about the models, and it's interesting to see how many people write down sleep. When I do these before, over half the room write down sleep, which is interesting because we all think, mentally, that's what we're thinking about. So let me go. Okay, perfect. Thank you for sharing. So let's discuss for a few minutes about privilege. Again, this is a word that you've heard before. And so it's a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a person or a group of people. It's also can be defined as a right, immunity, or benefit enjoyed only by a person beyond the advantages of most, and then a special advantage not enjoyed by everyone. So here's some group dynamics, privilege group dynamics. Not notice the daily indignities that people of color experience. Again, like hearing someone say, I don't see color, that's kind of taken away who I am, and you do see my color. So that's again, a privileged group dynamic. We get to decide what is and what is not racial in nature. For instance, I had a conversation with a neighbor, and we were talking about everything that's going on in the world. And he's a white Jewish man. And he said, I get harassed by the police all the time. And it kind of took me aback because I was like, I'm sure you do, but to actually hear him say it, when you're having conversations with people, to hear people say those things kind of really gives you a little gut punch to me. So I would consider him to be one of the privileged group dynamics. I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it, but he felt that it was okay to say. They also focus on how much progress we have made rather than how much more needs to be changed. You can hear those comments sometimes when people say, well, we're not in slavery anymore, or look how far we've come, but we're still having these same issues about the same things. And then also they expect people of color to be the diversity expert. We've all heard this before, right? If you're an organization and you expect, say you want African-American, you want a person of color in interview committees. Well, if you only have 5 people of color in your entire organization, then they become the rotating person in and out of interview committees, correct? I mean, that's something I see in my job all the time. We were having that conversation of how do we keep that from happening, making just the one person the expert and the one person on every interview committee and getting their opinion about everything. We need to broaden and include everyone. So these are some of the group dynamics from the privileged group. And as you can see, this was adapted from race dynamics and racism on today's campus. Let's talk a little bit about the marginalized group dynamics. So if you're not privileged, then you're marginalized. And they clearly recognize the negative consequences they will experience if they speak up, which leads to people not wanting to say anything when they see things that are wrong. They internalize the negative stereotypes about their own group and other groups of color. They start to believe what they hear, even though they may or may not know better. They feel hopeless and disempowered. We see that a lot, whether it comes to talking to your supervisor or a coworker, sometimes you don't feel like that you have the power or that you should even say anything. And are often at least bicultural and know how to work within the white culture and how to live within their own culture. So they're playing 2 dual roles, right? And that can become difficult to kind of, sometimes you have to fit in. You have to fit in with where you're working, you have to fit in with your group of friends. I have a close friend who said, I have my doctoral friends, and then my friends can't meet with the doctoral friends. They don't mesh. And again, that's part of the group dynamics that we talk about. All right, so let's talk about how these dynamics impact on organizational culture and the organization itself. So when you talk about the biases and the microaggressions that we have, it leads to mistrust and distrust in the organization. When you experience these things on a regular basis with organization or your group, you no longer feel like you can trust anyone that has your interest at heart. Unintended harm. And sometimes intended harm. Sometimes people are fully aware of what they're doing, but we give them the benefit of the doubt, say that they are not. It leads to tension among coworkers, among supervisors, administration. It just doesn't make for a good place to be working. A sense of defeat. People feel like that they have nothing, they're powerless. They can't say anything. So why even bother? They've already lost without even trying. The racial battle fatigue. And again, that's what we talked about, becoming the diversity expert. All of a sudden someone might say, well, what do you think? And you have to say, well, I don't speak for everyone, but there's a couple of sort of researches out there where, people are feeling that way. I'm not the African-American spokesperson. I can only tell you what I'm feeling, not for everyone. And then anxiety. When you're uncomfortable where you are and there's no trust, you have anxiety. And defensiveness, become very defensive about things, again, just because of what you're experiencing. Reputation of the organization becomes questioned. If it's not important to the organization, then how can you continue to work for them? And declining outcomes. If you've got all these things going on, you're not going to be wanting to do what the organization needs to move forward. So how can you undo your unconscious bias? So the first thing is acknowledge the bias when it shows up. As you talked about, you have to admit that you have it, and we know that it's there, but you don't have to stay there. You don't have to live in that forever. Gain some insight into your own biases, which you're doing today, like workshops like these and reading and there's all kinds of research out there, and I can share my resources at the end to help you understand. Ask yourself questions. Ask yourself, should I really say what I'm thinking? If it's in my head, it doesn't need to come out. And then expand your experiences. So if you don't have friends of different races and cultures, then try to find a way to get that in your life so that you can be diverse and won't be so apprehensive about mingling with people of other races and cultures and backgrounds. Forgive yourself if you get back into your old habits, and it's okay, it happens. Like I said, it happens to me all the time. I think things I shouldn't all the time. And then be open to addressing your biases head on. And there's some more. Become aware and knowledgeable of your own implicit bias, which is the things that we've been doing here and sharing, talking to people about them. Confront them and use the knowledge to better interrupt your own and others' micro-iniquities. Do self-work, read, listen to stories, and watch films that help you question your own privilege. And be careful not to compartmentalize a person based on one or few aspects of their identity, but rather look at the intersection of identities and see one as an individual. And I think that works in the classroom because you have students, we don't know what those students are coming into our classrooms with, right? We have to be mindful of that. They have other things going on that we can't see. And it's our job to make sure that we know our biases and address them and know how to handle them with our students. For the organization. So commitment from the top down, leadership should be the first champion. I really like this first bullet because it talks about, let me give an example. I am on a ad hoc committee and the organization decided that we would do a committee in response to what's been going on in the world. And which is fine, we've met a couple of times, but there's no money for this committee. There's no budget. So if we want to attend a training or bring someone in, there's no budget. So to me, is there really a commitment if we can't even have money to do what we need to do? As an example of the commitment from above. So leadership should be the first champion. You should ask, how do we define inclusion? How do we define diversity? How do we define equity? What does that look like? One of the things the YMCA recently is they're going through this, questioning these things. Their diversity statement is on the first page of their website. And to me, that speaks volumes. That lets me know that they are really adamant about knowing that they letting the people know that they care about diversity. So simple things like that, making sure your diversity statement is updated on a regular basis, make sure it's displayed prominently where everyone can see. No one should have to search for your diversity statement, right? It should be pretty clear if their commitment is there. Again, these are just my opinions. Then you also have to ask, what are we really trying to do as an organization? Are we trying to just have these workshops just to kind of say we've done it? Is it a checkbox? Or is it really because we're trying to change the culture? These are questions that you can ask yourself. And then also you want to strategize, plan, and assess. I think it's very important that when you have conversations and you have these things together, that you figure out a way to assess, okay, how did that work? You've attended this training, so now what? Maybe, what are your feelings now? Are they different than when you attended the training? Those kind of questions. And then what you think you're doing versus what you actually are doing is another question for your organization. And then listen to the experts. I'm not an expert by any means, but I have a ton of resources to help you get where you need to be, and to back up that I'm not making this up. I really am following the ones that are out there. All right, so debiasing. Let's talk about these. There's 3 ways to debias. Of course, there's education, which is mindfulness. We've talked about that. That's the same thing to me as acknowledging that you have debias. Critical conversations, having conversations like these, even having conversations with your friends and your family. If they're saying things that you know might be a microaggression or might be privilege coming out, say something. Feel comfortable saying something and being able to help them acknowledge what they're doing also. And training, you know, there's webinars, there's workshops, there's all kind of training out there for it to help you debias. And also exposure, so contact. Make sure you have friends of all diverse backgrounds. We talked about that. Uncomfortable situations. Sometimes you may be in an uncomfortable situation at your job or with family, and that's okay. But knowing how to process that will help you with your debiasing efforts. And then approach, so racial equity, impact assessment, policies. What are your policies saying about the culture of your organization? And then equitable practices. These are all ways that you can debias as an organization. So that's all I have to share. Let me show you my resources. So this first one is unconscious bias in the workplace. You can't afford to ignore it. And here's the link for that. And I can provide these if you guys need them. I just like to share some of the things I've gotten. Delivering through Diversity Report. And this is through the McKinsey Foundation. And then the Ohio State University Current Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity. This is a great institute, and I highly encourage you to go online. You can Google all of these, but these are the 2 that I looked at and use a lot, is understanding implicit bias and chipping away at implicit bias. And then the implicit association test. Has everyone taken that test or heard of that test? You shake your head. If not, I highly encourage you to take it. It kind of really opens up your biases for what you may not even think about. I took that test several times, and here's the link for that. And also proven strategies addressing unconscious bias in the workplace. This is a great tool. It is all online. It's about 20 pages, but it is absolutely fabulous. It's through Cook Ross, and it's through Diversity Matters. I think it's a really good resource to have also. So that's my presentation. These are my resources. Are there any questions or any pending things that anyone wants to say? I see the chat is going. Oh, okay, perfect. Oh, perfect. So they're going to make sure you get the links and the PowerPoint. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, that's all I have. Sarah, Ellen.
Thank you, Jamie. And so now what we'd like to do is, if there's anyone who would like to stay on and engage in any additional discussion, you may feel free to do so. We'll stay on for a couple minutes and see if anyone stays on, and then we'll let that conversation go for a little while. Otherwise, the rest of you, again, thank you so much for being here today. Make sure that you register for next week's session, which is very timely because it follows Jamie's presentation today and gets more in depth with micro-messaging and microaggressions with Dr. Cleveland. And so go to the NAA Professional Development page and sign up there for that webinar. And as Sarah noted, and as I suggested at the beginning, this will be recorded and placed on the NAA website along with the PowerPoint and past items as well. So Jamie, we'll stay on for a minute or two here and see if there's anyone who would like to engage in conversation. And if their schedules don't allow or there aren't any follow-up questions, then we'll close it out. But we'll wait about a minute so that those of you that want to go may go. Otherwise, everyone else, please stay on and we can have a conversation about whatever it is that you have on your mind.
Thank you, guys.
I want to go to that beach that's behind you right now.
Me too, Luke.
Although here in Illinois, it is so humid right now that you're pretty much swimming anyway.
Really? That's interesting, Illinois, because it's usually pretty chilly this time of year, right?
Oh no, this is our peak hot. It's hot and humid usually this time of year.
Okay.
So I have a quick question if you have a moment.
I sure do.
In Illinois, we are at the point where we're finally ready to, we've created a task force among all of our branches of ag education. Like there's the student organization and the teachers organization, and then there's like the state executive staff. So we got all these like moving parts that make up ag education in our state. We finally put together this task force, like of representation of all of those groups to do a needs analysis, like to just do an assessment of like, where are we at? What are the things that we need to address? And where do you typically start? And I've led trainings, and I feel still intimidated of how to, like, because I'm the guy on the inside. I'm just the staff member, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
you know, I've been asked to go other places and speak, and I feel like my voice isn't as strong when I am here, sitting here in our state. So, like, where do you usually recommend groups who are sitting down to have that first organizational look at issues related to making sure that you've got your policies, procedures, staff
Right.
training, vetting, things like that? Where do you start? Is it just sort of a moment ago you mentioned ensuring that you define inclusion, diversity, and equity. So, like, is that the place you start, like, just to have common language and agreement, and then build from there?
Yes, I think that is, if you don't already have an assessment to look at from like previous time or to figure out where the organization is, I think the first thing that you should do is your diversity statement, because I think it shows the interest and the buy-in, which is really what you need to get people on board, right? If they're not buying into what you're saying, then you might as well forget any kind of training, survey, workshop, anything you want them to do if they don't believe it.
So we have a standard we have an inclusion statement that was adopted by all the organizations a couple of years ago and has been front and center on our website. I'd like to see it have a little more oomph. I mean, that's something we'll discuss personally, but I guess following that diversity definition, the inclusion and equity, all of it together, where do you typically go next? Is it focusing on staff and leadership and making sure that you have bylaws and procedures and policies in place for training and accountability measures, and then you sort of work on following after that? Like, do you start at the top within an organization?
Yes, I think you should start at the top, because that is an opportunity, because most organizations do not review their policies and procedures in a proactive way, right? Most of the time we're looking at them because we're reacting to something that's happened.
Yeah.
And I think that is a wall that we have hit as diversity experts and practitioners. We have to be ahead of the game. And so by the time we're reacting to it, it's already over and people are already upset and their emotions are involved instead of logically thinking. Yeah. So maybe taking the first step could be maybe committing to revise your statement once a year so that you're on top of the ever-changing things that are going on in the world and the media. Maybe that could be the first step. Maybe the second step is making sure your statement is, again, prominent throughout the organization on every web page. People shouldn't have to search for your diversity statement, right? If it's truly the commitment that you want from the top, it should be right there. So maybe those kind of things, I don't really want to say low hanging fruit, but things that are possible that you're putting meat behind instead of just talking about. And maybe setting aside some small funds for the people on this task force that can do a training. For instance, maybe someone, $150 per person could get one training for everybody. I think that's really important. I think that really speaks to the commitment if there's funds behind what you're talking about.
That's a great idea.
Those are really good questions. Thank you for that.
Who are some people that you, where are places you would go or recommend for connections to receive that sort of outside training? Again, I can't do it because I'm the insider.
Right.
And I need the validation, like the committee needs the validation of an outside person. You don't listen to your mother, but the neighbor tells you something, you're like, oh, that makes total sense.
Right, right. What I can do is there are a couple. I like Samuel. I don't know if you ever heard of Dr. Samuel Betantis. He is out of Chicago. He is a diversity and inclusion practitioner expert. He is wonderful. He actually has a course that I took called Train the Trainer, and he gives you everything you need to be able to train others.
That's like where I need to go.
Yes,
Okay.
it is. And he's actually out of Chicago. It is a fabulous training. It's about a week long, but it is so meaty and heartfelt, and it really does open your eyes to all kinds of things.
Okay.
He talks about privilege. He talks about Hispanics. He talks about women, like Asian. He talks about everything. It's a great opportunity. So he's one. There's also one, I'm sorry, I can't think of his name, but I can make sure I send it to Ellen to forward to everyone. He has a training specifically for students. It's a leadership academy for students focused on diversity. That would be really good. And they're doing a virtual conference this year. I was just reading about that not too long ago. So he's really good, and I'll get that name to Ellen to share.
I would be very interested in that.
Of course.
Jamie, just let me jump in real quick. I also want to let Luke, I'm not sure if you were on the state staff call last week, but Dr. Cleveland and his associates, of who Jamie is certainly one of them, will be offering a session this fall and into early, well, mostly starting early 2021, to train state leaders in that kind of thing that you're actually discussing. So
what sort of timeline are you thinking of? Like in October or?
No, because we want to do in person. So it'll probably be early 2021, but it'll be an application and selection process that Dr. Cleveland and other external partners will vet and take care of selecting.
That's awesome.
So it's the information about it will be out this fall, but the training won't happen till late this year. It just depends on COVID.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I've been monopolizing. I'm guessing there's others with questions.
Oh, you're
Thank
fine.
you.
Thank you for those. Yeah,
Thank you, Jamie.
But I'll be sure to send those, the ones that I've looked up, I'll send them to Ellen to share with everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, Jamie. I know that'll be really useful for everyone.
Hi, this is Pat Jepson from Connecticut. I had a question for some insight on finding balance between making sure if you're in a group or an organization with a very small number of people of color and you want to give them a voice and not be trying to act like everything is, everything's fine, I don't see color, but then the other side of it, not making them feel like you're always going to them, asking for their input, asking for them in some ways to represent the whole community. How do you find the balance between those two extremes?
That's a really good question. That's a good question. I think, well, Ellen, go ahead if you're going to talk.
Nope, this one's all you.
Oh, okay. I think maybe I can speak to I guess more personal to that. They may not mind. They may not mind being the person if you can show that it's valued. Like if you only have 5 people of color in your organization and you need them, then show them that it's valued. I'll give you a perfect example. I served on the interview committee. I've served on several in my organization, and we were interviewing someone, and the person that I recommended would have been perfect for the job, but they didn't get it. And there was no reason behind it. I was the only one that voted for them to go forward, and they didn't get it. So naturally, I felt like, well, my voice is not heard. So what is the point? Why keep serving on these things if my voice and opinion is not taken? So maybe being sure to understand if they know that they are valued and what they're saying really does make a difference, and not just so you can check box. We spend a lot of time check boxing, right? We've done that diversity training. We've got that annual training done. We've got this done. It's all check boxing and not making sure people are valued. And even something simple as making sure they have a place to go that maybe is not their supervisor or not HR, like a ombudsman for people of color, just so they can have a chance to have a discussion and won't feel like it's going to come back on them. Does that make sense? Just like you have a student ombud who the student can go to and talk things through, I think people of color may need that same time and space just to be able to maneuver what's going on. And I think, again, that would show value, that it's important to them what they're feeling, and you do really want to hear about it and make it better. Maybe starting there.
Yes, that's helpful. And I think probably thinking about some of the statements and implicit bias of people say things sometimes with good intention, but they might be microaggressions. And I think we have to keep learning to recognize some of the things that we say with good intentions, but really have some negative impact.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good question. Anybody else?
So what's a good way to open up a conversation when you're wanting to try to learn about somebody's heritage, you're wanting to try to learn about culture, and you want to be able to experience that knowledge that they have without being in some way microaggressive? Are there any good statements to use? Any good ideas?
That's a good question. Perhaps maybe maybe the first step would be Googling, for instance, that culture. And then you could say, oh, I noticed this, have you experienced that before? Or can you share, if you've experienced, I don't know, I can't think of what it might be, but for instance, a movie would be a good start. Maybe if you research a culture and there's a particular movie that benefits this culture, maybe you could say, have you seen this before? What are your thoughts about that? Maybe something as simple as that, maybe just finding that connection to where it's not offensive to them, but it really looks like that you just want to know more.
Okay. I was at a workshop once and that question was asked, and the presenter said, show respect by doing the research on your own and not asking them to do your education for you. So, so just like you said, Jamie, if you do the research ahead of time and show that you're committed to wanting to learn more about a particular subject or whatever, background or whatever, that by showing respect that you dove in and did the research first, and then you can have a conversation about it later instead of asking that person to be the educator about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Help answer more.
Yep.
And I think at the end of the day, it really is about just making sure people feel valued, especially with everything that's going on. Our voice is all we have. So if my voice doesn't mean enough to you to even listen, even want to take the time to learn about me and my culture, and not just African American, but any culture, then that says a lot about the organization as a whole, that they're allowing these people. And this is just Jamie's opinion. Says a lot about the organization that they're allowing these people to continue to perpetuate these kind of things, right? Because if you're not taking the time to listen, you're not taking the time to figure out what's going on in the culture, you're not encouraging people to do these trainings and do these kind of things, that speaks volumes to the reality of what the organization looks like, in my opinion. What else you got? Anybody else? Those are good. I like these. And I forgot to give my contact information if there's other questions. So I'll be sure that Ellen has that too. My email, anything that, so you can reach out at any time. If you have questions about anything, feel free to shoot me a message and we can discuss it.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, we'll be sure to. Is it in your PowerPoint as well? It was at the end.
It is not. I meant to add it, but I'll make sure that you have it to share. Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Jamie, for staying for the after party. It's always good conversation. And
it is. Keeps me on my toes, makes me think.
Glad Dr. Cleveland brought you to us. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate you guys. And you guys have a great day, rest of your week, and let's get ready for classes, right?
That's right. That's right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you all next week.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Ms. Jamie.
Thank you.